Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are extremely honored and pleased to have with us today Ambassador Elliot Abrams. Mr. Abrams received his Bachelor's of Arts from Harvard College, a Master's of Science in International Relations from the London School of Economics, and his Juris Doctor law degree from Harvard Law School. Ambassador Abrams served in key foreign policy positions for Presidents Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. Under the first Trump administration, Mr. Abrams served as the U.S. Special Representative for Venezuela from 2019 to 2021, and as the U.S. Special Representative for Iran from 2020 to 2021. Ambassador Abrams is a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations, and additionally, he is a member of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council. Ambassador Abrams has written numerous books, including Tested by Zion, the Bush administration, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Democracy, How Direct, Views from the Founding Era and the Polling Era, Close Calls, Intervention, Terrorism, Missile Defense, and Just War Today, Security and Sacrifice, Isolation, Intervention, and American Foreign Policy, Shield and Sword, Neutrality and Engagement in American Foreign Policy, and Undue Process, a story of how political differences are turned into crimes. And today we will be discussing Ambassador Abrams' more recent work, fascinating book titled If You Will It, Rebuilding Jewish Peoplehood for the 21st Century. Ambassador Abrams, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Okay. Just to get started, If You Will It, what inspired you to write If You Will It, and what key message do you hope readers take away from the book?
I wrote a book about the American Jewish community in 1997 called Faith or Fear, based on the data that was available then that suggested some negative trends in the American Jewish community. For example, people were shocked then to find out that the intermarriage rate was 52%. This book, If You Will It, was written in a certain sense with the same push of new data, new studies about the American Jewish community that I thought suggested we're a little bit too satisfied with where we are, that I thought suggested that in many ways the community is in trouble because so many Jews are leaving it. And I wanted to look at, first of all, I wanted to say that. And secondly, I wanted to say to people, there are things that can be done, practical things, achievable things that can be done that would perhaps blunt or reverse some of those trends.
Okay. And the title of Jewish Peoplehood, what is Jewish Peoplehood? How do you define that? Is that different from the Jewish nation, the Jewish religion? And why is that concept so important for the 21st century and beyond?
This is a 5-hour question, but we don't have 5 hours. The book I wrote, 25 years ago, said, look, there's one answer to keeping Jews Jewish, and it's Judaism, period. The problem with that answer, I think, as I was writing, If You Will It, is it's not wrong, but it's kind of implausible. That is, to say to people, here's the problem, you're not religious enough. You may be a conservative Jew, you may be a Reform Jew. No, you need to be Orthodox, you see, or you need to be at least a very traditional conservative Jew. That's not going to persuade very many people who are not Orthodox that Judaism, the religion, should be central to their Jewishness and their own identity. But I think for many, many American Jews, the sense of being Jewish And what you asked, what is peoplehood? It's a sense of belonging to a group, a community. And for many American Jews, that community is not defined by their religious beliefs or religious practice. It is that sense of belonging to a people or nation or group. That is what gives them that identity. And I think it is more practical to build on that and try to reinforce that than to concentrate solely on religious practice. And I say to Orthodox Jews, well, tomorrow if the Orthodox community is going to expand, it's going to expand in two ways. One is by having children. The other is by reaching out. I mean, you could say Chabad does this most to the rest of the Jewish world, to people who are, in a sense, candidates, the reserve army, to mix metaphors that could be brought into Jewish religious practice. I think peoplehood is something that is certainly felt by religious Jews, but it's also felt by a lot of non-religious Jews. And I believe, and I argue this in the book, there are ways of building it, of creating it. It isn't something that merely comes from heaven, nor does it come exclusively from religious practice. There are other ways to build it.
And so what would be, in your opinion, the game plan if you got together all of the leaders of American Jewry and put them in one room and said, okay, everybody, here's the game plan. You do this, you do this, you do that.
Yep.
And through this, we can create Jewish peoplehood, and we can create something that's going to be enduring.
The first thing you'd say to all those Jewish leaders in one room is, quiet, please, stop arguing. But then I would say, first, the book is not primarily addressed to Orthodox Jews or practicing conservative Jews, traditional conservative Jews. What I would say to them, I think, is what we're trying to do is transmit from generation to generation. What we're worried about here when we talk about identity, continuity is, I mean, there's a story I like about, I'll come back to your question, but the Duke of Wellington who beat Napoleon at Waterloo. He came from a good family, but not a fancy aristocratic family. And at a dinner once, when he was already the Duke of Wellington, a woman seated next to him said, "Duke, from whom are you descended?" And the Duke of Wellington replied, "Madam, I am not a descendant. I am an ancestor." Now, what I say to Jews, particularly non-practicing Jews, is you are a descendant. You're a descendant of thousands of years of Jewish life. The question is whether you will be an ancestor for more generations of Jews, whether we in the American Jewish community will be. And the numbers, and I have some here if you want a few, are bad. So what I would say to those Jewish leaders is, what is missing for non-Orthodox Jews is immersive experiences where they live as a Jew among Jews. If you go back to the immigrant generations, my grandparents, didn't matter whether they were religious or not. My parents growing up, they lived in immersive Jewish communities. Everyone around was Jews. They shopped Jewish. They spoke Yiddish, etc. Since, probably the 1950s, that has not been true of very many American Jews. So how do you create those immersive experiences? In the book, I say there are three ways. One is Jewish schooling. Two, one that I think we don't take seriously enough, Jewish summer camping. And three is Israel, time in Israel. And the more, the better. And, we can talk about each of those three, but I think those are the three that I would promulgate.
So as you have analyzed the statistics and, from when you wrote the first book on this topic 25 years ago, just in your opinion, what's happened? What are some of the rates, whether it's
Yeah.
assimilation, intermarriage,
Yep.
anti-Semitism,
Yep.
what has happened to American Jewry in the last 20,
Um,
30 years?
well, just on numbers, the intermarriage rate in 1990 National Jewish Population Survey was 52%. And now it's well over 70 for non-Orthodox Jews. So that's a huge rise. Um, from the Pew study of 2020, Jewish Americans in 2020, a couple of numbers. About a third of people in America raised Jewish or with at least one Jewish parent no longer identify as Jewish. A third. Um, there's 2.4 million children in America living in a household with one or two Jewish parents, at least one. How many of them are being raised exclusively as Jews? Half, and half are not. Um, just another number. We've been doing birthright for 20 years, hundreds of thousands. With birthright, only 45% of American Jews have ever visited Israel once. And 45% of Jews by religion, that is, Jews who say, I am a Jew, my religion is Judaism, 45% say it is, quote, very important to them that their grandchildren be Jewish. So what's happened? What accounts for this? I'll give you one word answer: America. I mean, we are about 2%, 2.2, 2.3 of the population, and we no longer live the way we did, 100 years ago, 75 years ago, in heavily Jewish neighborhoods. We no longer face a Christian population that will not marry us, that will not live in the same neighborhood and won't let us in, etc. So it's the melting pot, I think. And it's happened. We're not the only religion that's happening to. We're not the only ethnic group that's happening to. It's happening pretty much to everybody. The difference is, of course, that we are such a small group that these populations falling away are really a danger to the future of the American Jewish community. So, I mean, again, the one word answer is America. You live in this society. Yes, there are ways of living a more Jewish life. For example, if you're Orthodox, you need to be able to walk to the synagogue. That means you're going to be living in a heavily Jewish neighborhood. If you're not Orthodox, the probability is you're not going to be living in a heavily Jewish neighborhood, and your kids, they're going to grow up in America. And they're going to grow up, they're going to go to college, and they're going to be in a college that's heavily non-Jewish, and a high school probably that's heavily non-Jewish. And they're going to go to a workplace that's heavily non-Jewish. And we know in 70% of the cases, they're going to end up dating and then marrying a person who is not Jewish. Life in America. And that's why it seems to me that if you want to create a strong Jewish identity, a sense that this is my people, how do you do that? Schooling, camping, Israel.
So how do you get American Jews to buy into that tripod of schooling, camping, and Israel? And again, is that enough to go beyond bagel and lox American Jewry?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you're asking the right question. The three are different. Take schooling. I mean, the problem with day school first, very expensive, very, very expensive in comparison to, say, um, travel to Israel or summer camp. Um, secondly, there's a lot of Jewish parents, non-Orthodox parents, who are not so sure about day school. Or to put it in economic terms, among Orthodox Jews, the demand for day school is inelastic. They've got to go. But among non-Orthodox Jews, it's very elastic. So that means, for one thing, that the schools need to be very good, very good. It also means that the parents have to be worried about the alternatives, which are public school or private school. And they ought to be worried, I mean, now, because we know in a lot of states, a lot of cities, what is being taught in elite private schools and in public schools is anti-Israel in many cases and anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. But I think there are experiments with this. Just as an example, in Seattle, there's a foundation, the Salmis Foundation, that is helping fund Jewish day schools and helping come up with formulas where you say to parents, you won't have to spend more than X% of your income, no matter how many children you have in day school. This is also being tried in Toronto. And because the demand is elastic, if you lower the price and keep the quality high, more Jewish kids go. Camp, I think, is easier because what's the competition for Jewish day school? Public school, everywhere in America. What's the competition for camp? I mean, what are the kids going to do in the summer? Got to do something. And what you find, it's interesting. There is competition if you're in the top quarter in income. You may have a summer home, a beach house. You may go to Europe, and if you're in the lower quartile in income, you can't afford it. But it's in that middle 50% where a lot of kids go to Jewish camps, and a lot of others, I think, could be lured into doing it. And what do I mean by Jewish camp? A place where you live as a Jew among Jews. And then Israel, I mean, birthright, we know, okay, birthright's a great deal, right? A free trip to Israel. Who could say no? Birthright has been doing this for 20 years, and they started with 10-day trips. And they have 20 years of data that I think demonstrates that for many of those kids, it's life-changing for 10 days, or as I like to put it, 10 lousy days. And it changes, not everybody, of course, not everybody. Something like a quarter or a third don't go back in the next 10 years, but many do. And for many, it has a huge, you know what else? It has a big impact on intermarriage. It promotes in marriage, which of course has many other impacts on Jewish life. The more time, the better. If 10 days is good and is useful, think about a high school semester abroad. Think about a summer in Israel, summer camp in Israel, summer teen tour in Israel, high school junior year abroad. Don't go to Barcelona. Go to Jerusalem. Gap year. This is something that Natan Sharansky has been pushing very much. Gap year is now part of Orthodox life for most Orthodox kids. Why not expand that idea? I think a lot of parents would like that, let the kid mature. I think a lot of colleges would like it. So I think there is a chance. You need money. There's no question about that. But there are a lot of experiments with day schools, with camps. I mean, the Marcus Foundation, founded by the late Bernie Marcus, gave a lot of money to Jewish camping to try to, if you will, lure people in the first year, figuring they're going to love it and the kids are going to love it and they'll want to go back. There's one other thing we ought to mention, and that's anti-Semitism, which if you go back to 1990 was, dying out and was not a factor, much of a factor. Now there's a question. Is anti-Semitism spreading in America? How much will it spread? I think it's going to have an effect on which colleges many Jewish kids decide they really want to go to. It may be an opening for Jewish schooling, as parents say, well, I don't mind non-Jewish schooling. I mind anti-Jewish schooling. I don't think, I don't think we're going to get to the point where we live in ghettos again, but it may have an impact on schooling. But I would have to say this: there's not a lot of data on that because it's pretty recent. I mean, basically since October 7th of 2023. But the one study I have seen suggests that what happens to our kids when they go to college and they meet anti-Semitism and pro-Hamas and anti-Israel, protests and demonstrations, tends to depend on what they got to college with. I guess that's not shocking. But what they find is kids who have what's called a strong Jewish background. Did your family belong to a synagogue? Did you ever go to Hebrew school? Did your family have a Seder? Did et cetera, tend to react by being more strongly, by more strongly identifying as Jews. That's where your activists come from. And the kids from no Jewish background. Did your family belong to a Seder? No. Did you have a Seder? No. Do you celebrate Shabbat? No, no. Been to Israel? No, no, no. They tend to walk away from it. They don't want to be part of that controversy and that fight. I'm generalizing. There are going to be many, many exceptions on both sides, but generally, you got to start before college.
Two points on that. Number one, as you just mentioned, what's not included in the tripod is the synagogue. And the synagogue, of course, the great suburban edifices that arose in America, especially in the conservative and reform Jewry, where you had the synagogue and you had the swimming pool and you had the basketball league and whatever you wanted out of the synagogue. Where is the synagogue now, and why isn't that part of the tripod?
Well, that's a very good question. And there are some great scholars writing about the American Jewish community who disagree and who would put it there. Jack Wertheimer, for example, from Jewish Theological Seminary, would, I think, say school, camp, synagogue. So why didn't I put it in there? My thought was, if you're actively engaged in the synagogue, you're likely to be okay anyway. This is really, I was really talking about that part of the community that isn't, or yeah, they may belong and go, on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or the kid may go until bar or bat mitzvah, and then boom, they're out. So it didn't seem to me that that was the answer for non-traditional, non-religious American Jews. Again, it's a controverted point. Jack and many other scholars of the American Jewish community would say no, it needs to be central because it supplies something that nothing else does, which of course is Judaism. But only about 10% of American Jews practice something recognizable as Judaism.
So would the argument also be that Hillel, Chabad on the college campuses are doing wonderful work, incredible work, but it's not going to touch and reach the population that you're talking about here because they're not coming into college with that identity. And so maybe they grab a few of those people that don't identify, but why would they, if they want to immerse themselves completely into the college experience?
I think that's right. I mean, one thing I think it tells us is start young. And no, I think again, we're generalizing, and there are a number of experiments that bring young Jews together around synagogue life or religious life. But I think as a generalization, what I'm talking about, school, camp, Israel, will capture more of the population.
And Israel, how does Israel strengthen Jewish peoplehood in North America? I was at a conference many years ago, and it was then Foreign Minister Shimon Peres spoke, and he said one of the most amazing accomplishments of the Jewish people in the 20th century is that you have millions of children now speaking Hebrew as their native tongue here in Israel. He was speaking in Israel.
Mm.
And the counter argument to that is, but at the same time, you have a million Israeli Jewish children that don't know how to pray in a synagogue. So how does
Yeah,
Israel help again
yeah.
beyond? And again,
Well,
I'm generalizing beyond the horror,
yeah.
beyond dancing, Israeli
Well,
dancing.
a couple of things. One, if you are one of those secular Israelis, Hiloni, there's one thing that you can be pretty sure of. Your children are going to be Jews. They may be bad Jews from a sort of traditional religious sense, but in terms of maintaining Jewish identity through the generations, as long as they're Israeli and living in Israel, that is going to happen. And I mean, I have relatives. I'm sure you have many experiences too, where you say to somebody, "Are you religious?" No, 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 no. We're completely secular. Do you like candles on Shabbat? Well, of course. Do you have a Shabbat dinner with your children? Of course. I mean, it's a different thing in Israel. Um, the but how does it help us? I think the birthright experience and others suggest, and again, time matters, how much time, but um, you're 18, you're 19. You go to Israel, and if the program you're on is a good one, you meet your peers. You meet 18, 19-year-old Israelis, and they are risking their lives to fight for their country, to defend their country. You're worried about whether, ultimate frisbee is on or off. They're fighting and dying. I think that's some moving experience. Fighting and dying for what? What do they think? How do they live? Um, I I mean, what you want, and again, I think it works in many cases. You want the young person to go and spend some time there and think, this is not like visiting England. This is the Jewish homeland. These are my people. I'm one of these. And it will not happen for everyone who goes, but it will happen for a lot of them. And by the way, on the Hebrew, if you spend a year, the probability is at that age you'll pick up the Hebrew. I want to add one other thing, which is building this identity, Jewish identity outside of Israel is not impossible. And we seem to do the worst job of it in the whole diaspora. I mean, if you compare us to Australian Jews, Canadian Jews, French Jews, British Jews, and ask questions like, well, how many kids get a Jewish education? Well, what percentage of the people have been to Israel ever once? They're way ahead of us in every other diaspora community. So it isn't impossible to do that in the diaspora. Yeah, not exactly the same. Obviously, we're a much bigger community. One would have said until recently they may face more anti-Semitism than we do. They certainly face governments and parties that are much more anti-Israel than we really have in the last 75 years. Um, but other diasporas have done a better job, and I think we can do a better job.
When you look at not just North America, when you look at the entire world now, um, what's the paradigm shift since the establishment of the state of Israel? Is it Israel at the center of Jewish peoplehood and diaspora around it? I mean, the American diaspora story has been incredible. I don't think there's been a parallel to it in all of Jewish history. And it's called the nation of chesed, of kindness, America for the Jewish people. Has that changed? Is this what peoplehood is trying to prevent, that paradigm shift, and keep the diaspora and American Jewry paramount as in the totality of the Jewish people worldwide?
I wouldn't say that. I'd say it's about Jewish survival as a thriving community. some of those numbers that I mentioned, suggest we're really fraying at the edges. That we know, for example, if you have an over 70% intermarriage rate, we know what that means for the children. Again, I'm not speaking about any individuals. I'm speaking statistically. It means a lot of them are not going to be raised as Jews or identify as Jews. Intermarriage is a chain phenomenon. They're likely to marry non-Jews and not have Jewish children and leave the community. So the community will get smaller over time if these trends continue here and in any Jewish community outside of Israel. So the goal here for me is not to change America. The goal is to save the vitality, build the vitality of the Jewish community in America by building a stronger identity, sense of community, sense of Jewishness, sense of belonging to the Jewish people among American Jews.
So who does this? What's the game plan?
Yeah,
What's the coach? Who are the players and who's the coach?
right.
And how does it happen? And how do you get the funding for this?
Well, once upon a time, there was a thing called birthright, right? I mean, how do you get the funding for this? In that case, a very small number of very rich people did it. I mean, Michael Steinhardt, Sheldon Adelson, Charles Bronfman, I think that was it. I think this is first a slow development of what should we call it, consciousness. That is, in the Jewish community, people have to come to the conclusion we need more of this. For example, we need to make it possible for more Jews to go to summer camp and to want to. That requires both organization, for example, the Federation of Jewish Camp, and it requires money from Jewish donors, including Jewish federations. With schools, it again requires money from donors. In Toronto, for example, they raised a lot of money so that they could control the costs per family. So partly it's a question of priorities. What is most important? We have all these beautiful JCCs with their basketball courts and swimming pools, and I think it's a fair question. Do they work? And I don't know the answer to that. Do they really instill a sense of identity and peoplehood more than if you went to the Y? But Jewish camping, again, there's data on this. I mean, just to give you an example, if you look at the Jewish organizations, just pick 500 Jewish organizations around the country, many of the people leading them were counselors at Jewish camps. That's where they developed a sense of identity, of Jewishness, and desire to be part of that and stay part of that in their working careers. I think this has to be done largely as a form of guerrilla war. By that I mean it's synagogue by synagogue, it's federation by federation, it's foundation by foundation. Because we don't have what the British Jews, French Jews do. You've got one kind of central committee. I mean, we have the Conference of Presidents, but we don't have the CRIF in France, for example, where they really lead the community, make decisions for the community. So is this possible, what I'm recommending? Sure it is, and some of it is beginning to happen. There are these experiments around the country with travel to Israel, in communities all over, with trying to get more people into Jewish day schools, at least so that those who want them will be able to afford them. I mentioned Bernie Marcus and Route One and Camp. So there are experiments all over. There need to be more of them. They need to be better funded. It pains me that this is a generalization too, but you got a lot of younger Jews who are now 40, who are inheriting a lot of money. and they want to do something new, brilliant, different in their Jewish charity. Um, and that's actually the wrong attitude. Don't try to be brilliant and different. Try to support what works. It may be old and it may be old-fashioned, but if it's going to achieve these results, that's where the money ought to go.
And as you look around at the leadership of American Jewry, especially the younger generation, does American Jewry have the leadership, the young leaders, to take America into the 22nd century? Or are the leaders there to, if you have the funding, you put it all together and the focus was there, have we nurtured leadership today?
That's a very tough question. I think leadership tends to emerge as crises emerge. And we've seen, I think, parents emerge to combat, for example, forms of wokeness in school that are really forms of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel activity. And I mean, take the Anti-Defamation League. I think, frankly, after Abe Foxman left, the Anti-Defamation League moved left and moved political. And then came October 7th. And now they're fighting anti-Semitism full time. So it's partly a matter of younger, newer leadership emerging. It's also partly a matter of leadership in many organizations identifying the challenges differently. But I think if you look at the recently announced change in APAC from Howard Core to Elliott Brandt, that's a difference of, I don't know, 20 years, something like that, maybe 25. Yeah, I do think it's there, but I think we can also encourage it. I mean, I think crisis helps it emerge. Look at all the people, and we could mention names of people, very, very rich people, who were not donors to Jewish causes. They were donors to their universities. And then after October 7th, they found their universities would not stop anti-Semitic activity on campus. So they cut them off. And in many cases, started giving to Jewish causes. So I'm optimistic about Jewish leadership emerging and reorienting itself.
As you look at October 7th, Simchat Torah from a year and a half ago, is this the historical paradigm? It's only anti-Semitism that creates this survival mode, this guerrilla warfare. Without anti-Semitism, it doesn't happen.
I don't think that's right. I think certainly the question of Israel has been important to American Jews intermittently, particularly after, let's say, 45 to 48, 67, 73. But it has tended to rise and fall. You get an outpouring of support in 1967, and everybody says the Jewish world is different permanently. Well, it wasn't. I mean, it goes back to normal. I don't think, I mean, I also hope and pray that this country, the United States, is going to experience the level of anti-Semitism that would fundamentally, permanently change the way Jews in America live. Yes, it's true that that would change the way a lot of American Jews see their world, but that's not the way we want it to happen. We want it to happen out of the positive realization of the value of Jewishness, Judaism, Jewish community feeling. And I think for a lot of Jews, an outburst of anti-Semitism won't have any positive impact at all. A lot of them will just run away. They'll hide.
You had mentioned before university campuses, woke, um, left-leaning. Where does the right, left, conservative, liberal divide come into play and impact in all these issues for American Jews? I mean, American Jewry, it's going to be 80% Democrat, 90% Democrat. If it's Franklin Roosevelt, it's going to be 120% Democrat. How does these divides come into play in what you're advocating here?
There's a different sort of field of, politics that is that I hope is unrelated to this. There is the Israel question, and both parties have anti-Israel factions. I'm a Republican, so I'm perhaps biased in saying the following. It's a larger faction in the Democratic Party today. And if that faction grows, then more American Jews are going to vote Republican. In fact, I think more would have in this election, but couldn't take Donald Trump. Nevertheless, the numbers, depends who you ask, but the numbers seem to have risen in a lot of Jewish communities. So first, if one party seems to be divided, really deeply divided over support for Israel, and the other isn't, that'll matter. And the reason, I would point to something, this is really sort of interesting. The left of center party used to get all the Jewish votes in England, Labour Party, and turned against Israel. And the Conservative Party under Margaret Thatcher was very supportive of Israel. And what did the Jews do? They started voting for the Conservative Party. Same in Australia, same in France, same in Canada. And wait until this next election that's coming. Watch how the Jews vote. They're going to punish Justin Trudeau's party for his unwillingness to fight anti-Semitism. We haven't had that here. Now, or we have had very little of it. Yes, more Jews vote Republican than did, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. But you haven't had the kind of change that other diaspora communities have seen. One of the reasons for that is that, at least for a good period of time, both parties seem to be equally supportive of Israel. So you could make your choice on who to vote for based on a lot of different things: domestic policy, social policy, foreign policy, not Israel policy, because there was nothing to choose from. I don't know if that's going to be true in the future. If it isn't true, obviously Jews are going to vote differently. Will it affect these domestic questions, education? Maybe. And I'll give you one example. Generally speaking, Democratic office holders have generally speaking, opposed school vouchers, partly because of the power of the teachers' unions. And Republican office holders have been in favor of vouchers. Traditionally, the Jewish community was against vouchers. The American Jewish Congress was the strongest fighter against them. It's not true anymore. Most Jewish federations have now said, yeah, vouchers have a role to play. One of the ingredients in the expansion of Jewish education in Florida is they have a good voucher program where the money follows the child. More and more states are doing that. If we get to the point where the Republican Party is in favor of helping parents fund religious education and the Democratic Party is against it, that probably pushes some Jews, although Orthodox Jews obviously are more likely to vote Republican already. We've seen that. It depends what neighborhood, what community, what degree of orthodoxy, but they've moved. They've begun moving. So I think this will this potentially has an impact on how we vote, but does it have an impact on how we live? Maybe not so much.
You had expressed earlier when we talked about leadership and optimism. Overall, as you look at the situation today, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or somewhere in between, or it all depends?
Yeah, in between. I
Between.
mean, can we do this? Yes. That is the American Jewish community capable in a general sense of organizing and funding activities that would create in our children and grandchildren a greater sense of peoplehood, of identity as a member of this ancient people? Sure. We have the money, we have the talent. Are we going to do it? I think that's uncertain.
Okay. And in conclusion, on a personal note, what's next? So many activities that you're doing in different organizations after this book. What's on your plate right now, and what do you hope to accomplish in the next years?
Well, the thing that's occupying more and more of my time is an organization called Tikva. Tikva is a Jewish educational charity in Manhattan. We've been supporting programs for high school kids, college kids for about 20 years. But we're expanding them. We opened our own school in New York, in Manhattan, in September, last September, called Emmett Classical Academy, which we don't call a Jewish day school, we call it a Jewish prep school. There are a lot of classical schools that are Protestant and Catholic. This was the first Jewish one. So we want to build that, and we've had lots of interest from groups around the country, parents saying, we want to do that here. So that's one thing, building a new kind of Jewish school. The other is a program we're involved in, we at Tikva, with the University of Florida. They're building an honors college called Hamilton College at the University of Florida. And we went to them and said, it's fantastic, it's great, but it doesn't have enough Jewish content. And they said, great, let's do it. So we're helping them find faculty members, courses, and we have a great network of 60 Jewish day schools that we work with. And what we're saying to them is, you do not need to go to some Ivy League school where you're going to be in combat for 4 years and where half the history department hates you. You can go to a number of very good schools in America that want you. And one of them, we're starting with Florida. We want University of Florida to be a destination school for the best Jewish students who want to have a well-rounded collegiate experience and in a place that values them as Jews and that has a terrific program of Jewish education. That can be replicated in schools. We call it a red state strategy, frankly, because it's more likely to be schools, and including state schools in the South, which want more Jews. And Florida obviously is a place where the Jewish community is growing by leaps and bounds. University of Florida is actually the school in America, the university in America, with the largest number of Jewish students, 9,000. So we're starting way ahead of the curve. That's what occupies me kind of emotionally and intellectually most right now.
Again, Ambassador Abrams, urge all our viewers and listeners to go online and purchase If You Will It, Rebuilding Jewish Peoplehood for the 21st Century. It's a wonderful book that I had the opportunity to read. And Ambassador Abrams, you should continue to go from strength to strength, from chayil to chayil in all your endeavors. Thank you so much for today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ari. It's been a pleasure.